Thanks everyone for attending today's conversation. I'm Jim Durkin, patent attorney and senior sales engineer at IP.com. I'm joined today by Jasminder Brar, the Director of Strategic Development and Intellectual Property at Titan Medical Inc. Today we'll be discussing the challenges faced by companies in patent research, the increasing role of artificial intelligence in patent analysis, and some specific techniques that can be leveraged by innovative companies of all sizes to drive growth. Just as a little background, IP.com is an intellectual property solutions company with the focus on leveraging AI to enable critical business decisions. Our unique prior art database is the largest and most visible defensive publication service. And IP.com is also a partner of IEEE, the world's largest technical professional organization. We'll be collecting questions during today's broadcast to cover after the discussion, so please feel free to use the question box. Titan Medical Inc. is a development stage medical device company based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Titan Medical focuses on the development of cutting-edge computer-assisted robotic surgical technology. Jasminder's work, along with Titan's executives, engineers, and financing teams, has pushed intellectual property to the forefront of their business strategy. Before joining Titan, Jasminder practiced at Smart & Bigger in Vancouver, British Columbia. And prior to practicing law, he worked as an engineer and in products marketing with National Semiconductor in Santa Clara, California. He has a law degree and Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering, both from the University of Manitoba. Jasminder, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
So we have a lot to cover in today's conversation. I'd like to dive right in. Taking a look at the agenda, you can see that we'll be covering practical applications for licensing, competitive intelligence, and some challenges that are faced by both startups and large organizations. So Jasminder, my first question is kind of a broad one, is what types of critical business intelligence are important to you in your work, and particularly if you could speak a little to combining patent data, technical literature, and some of the market intelligence?
Sure. Yeah. So from my perspective, really looking at it from intellectual property lens, R&D changes and advancements are critical. M&A activity, litigation activity, are all key aspects from a business intelligence perspective that are very helpful in the work that I do day to day.
And how do you leverage software like platforms that we develop at IP.com to do competitive intelligence tracking and help make some of those decisions you spoke about?
Yeah, so the main thing is really just to have this constant update and to know what's going on in the field. So we want to be able to track patent filings and trends to provide a general assessment of R&D activity of what's going on in the industry. The last thing you want is to not know what your competitors are doing or what universities or other smaller companies are up to. So the more you know, the better. So if you can use software to provide this information to fill in those gaps, you'll be a lot further ahead of the curve. The other thing, besides just finding the raw data of what's happening or what's being filed, it's also key to learn of who's buying and who may be selling. So patent ownership changes are critical, and software definitely helps with that. And at the same time, litigation filings, because you could be in an industry that is litigation adverse, and all of a sudden there's litigation going on that can impact a company's decisions, not just from an IP perspective, but from a business perspective.
I think that's a very insightful point, and certainly we're seeing in the IPR context in the U.S. a number of important court decisions, situations like Oil States recently from the Supreme Court, and I think just generally offensive and defensive uses of litigation and IPR proceedings. And, another aspect of your question I wanted to ask about is one of the things with patents is it's to some degree backwards looking because of some of the publication delays. How do you leverage some of the technical literature like IEEE content and others in your analysis for competitive intelligence?
Yeah, so absolutely critical to look at the non-patent literature. So IEEE is great for a great source for providing in-depth technical information. We also, I think it's great to look at university publications. Universities are constantly publishing. That's the whole nature of the researchers and the professors at universities to get out there and publish, so you can get a lot of information through the university publications and technical magazines. There's a lot of technical magazines that actually build on the university publications that are excellent resources for finding non-patent information. The other thing is that, it's 2018. Not all of us are, and it's beyond just technical literature that we read. I think what we can look at really to fill in that gap that you mentioned, this 18-month window where you get this dead period of you don't know what's been filed, is to follow meetings, conferences, and even corporate technical presentations. We've seen corporations give presentations to universities, especially in Silicon Valley, where you have a lot of high-tech executives going to universities and giving these great talks that are insightful for students and actually insightful for industry. In the medical field, the great resources are surgeons. I mean, they love to talk, and they can provide some good information of what's going out there. And in the context of where can you find this if you can't attend the meetings, is YouTube is a great source. LinkedIn is an excellent source. So all these other sources other than just technical publications can help fill in the gap and help form a better competitive picture.
Sure, I think that's a really great point. One of the sources we've worked on is in our platform is also that S&P Global Market Intelligence, trying to track company relationships, acquisitions, subsidiaries in a very accurate fashion. I did want to shift gears for a second into something that I think impacts certainly startups and cutting-edge smaller companies, but also larger companies, and that's when you're dealing with a competitor that has a very large portfolio, maybe in a certain space or even broadly speaking, what are some ways that you can deal with that?
Right, so the first thing you want to know is to understand. I mean, we all think we know that the competitor is potentially up to, but there's a lot of stuff that's happening that is more difficult to ascertain. The competitor's patent portfolios you can identify that, and as you just alluded to, this S&P information that tools like InnovationKey+ make use of, so it helps you get a bigger picture of what the competitor controls in terms of the patent portfolio through their own filings and subsidiary companies. The other thing what you want to do is use R&D resources to help craft a competitive landscape picture. So we get patent data to formulate this picture of what the competitors may be up to. If it's possible, if you can use R&D resources, because a lot of times this stuff is very technical. So to the extent that is possible, pull in R&D personnel to help craft this completer picture of the competitive landscape. Once you have this understanding, what I think IP professionals can do is help educate, develop, and shape the corporate roadmap that includes feeding the captured competitive info into the R&D roadmap. So that way, IP is impacting the development before even any drafting or filing of any patent applications. What we're doing basically by doing that is we're not working in an IP vacuum, which is, it's always good to file, once you have this understanding of what your competitors are up to. It's always good to, coordinate your patent drafting and filing accordingly. But if you can use the competitive intelligence that you've gathered to better influence the corporate decisions and the technical decisions, you'll find it a lot easier to do your IP jobs and I think drive more value for the company.
I think that's a very insightful point. And Just one thing I want to pick up from that, something we worked very hard on is making our software accessible for R&D deployment because of their unique technical knowledge that can really aid in that process. And I did want to shift gears for a second to ask about something that relates to small business patent portfolios, and that is how can you leverage the portfolios to grow revenue, increase the bottom line, and what are some of the challenges that you face in leveraging IP at development stage?
Right. So I think for smaller companies, there's two parts to it. So there's the pure growing of revenue, and I think there's another part which is avoiding loss of revenue. So the growing of the revenue, well, for startups and for smaller companies, portfolios are usually a lot smaller. So, the portfolios tend to line up more closely with the actual business. So the patent portfolios are really supporting the business of the company. That said, you do find quite often in smaller companies, there may be a lot of pivot points along the way. So you may have developed a patent portfolio, filed several patents and obtained patents to areas that are of no longer interest, so you can consider licensing out those patents or even selling off those portfolios. But you need to be mindful that as a smaller company, the patent count is helpful. So you may not necessarily want to do that. Where I think, and I go back to my point of avoiding loss of revenue is actually really important for startups. And you really need to, again, it goes back to this whole understanding of what your competition is up to and formulating a risk mitigation strategy to make sure that really you aren't stepping on the toes of larger players to avoid, to the extent that's reasonably possible, lawsuits and having the company tied up in expensive litigation. So I think there's a two-pronged point to this, that you want to grow revenue but also avoid loss of revenue.
Very interesting. So I had a question about artificial intelligence. Certainly it's something that was in the title of this talk, but I think that many uses of AI are transparent to the customer. At our company, IP.com, we've developed machine learning-based technologies to help discover the most relevant technical and patent literature to a search, rank and evaluate patent portfolios, and even new ideas across objective measurements. And we find that companies of all sizes are facing challenges. Like, we recently had a client who was inundated with invention disclosures to review. And we've been incorporating artificial intelligence to assist in this process. And I was wondering, just to maybe have a little more broad question, Jasminder, is what are some of your thoughts on the different time savings and extra value from the IP professional, the end user perspective that you can get out of some of these AI technologies?
So it really is doing more with less. So IP budgets are, it's always they're under strain, limited budgets, limited personnel. So the more you can do with less, the better. And with incorporation of AI, we don't, as a user, we may not see it right away that there's an artificial intelligence device or robot talking to you, but really it's what goes on, like you're saying, behind the platform and in helping identify relevant references and faster. So you want relevant documents in front of you, and you want them to show up fast, and so that you can do your job and add value where you can in assessing those references. So you mentioned the invention disclosures. So that is an area that I think where you can definitely leverage AI and probably through the semantic searching of taking invention disclosures and conducting semantic searching and leveraging the AI of the various tools to identify references. Potentially could also use not just invention disclosures, but if you maybe even want a little bit better results, is to look at drafting some early claims and even having the claims run through the artificial intelligence aspects of the semantic searching to try to get really good results. And I can tell you, I've personally done that, and the results that I've obtained are phenomenal. I've gotten results compared to 10 years ago when there likely wasn't AI being used. The results come up a lot faster and a lot more relevant.
For sure. I think we've seen a big impact from some of the newer machine learning technologies like deep learning neural networks that have made a big improvement from the end user perspective. Something else we developed last year was a unique combination of full text semantic or AI-based search and full text traditional Boolean search that are really merged together in a single interface without any restrictions on either end. And I do think that's part of the development is in this technology is bridging the knowledge gaps and enabling all different classes of users from beginner to expert to use platforms. But I do kind of want to go back to something we were talking about before. It's slightly different. And it's about startups and raising working capital. Capital can be a challenge, and certainly when you're looking to raise it, there's a variety of techniques. I was wondering if you could talk a little about intellectual property specifically and how that can help raise capital.
Most definitely. So IP can and definitely should be used to tell the startup story. So what I mean by that is there's with a startup of a smaller company, the company's trying to do something, like in the case of medical devices, or in case of our present company, we're trying to develop a robotic surgical system. What you want to have is the IP to tell the story. So through your filings, through your risk mitigation strategies, have the story told. That way you can have IP influence and craft your story, and you'll find that with the alignment of the IP and business goals and strategies, it likely makes the value proposition of the company a lot greater to a prospective investor. The story is a lot more convincing when you can weave in what you're doing from an IP perspective into the overall strategy, business strategy of the company, and really focus in on your innovation, what you're doing differently with respect to competition. What this also does, especially for startups, is as you're raising working capital, you will likely go through various rounds of diligence. And if you have already weaved in the IP story into the business story, you'll find the diligence will go a lot smoother. So the last thing you want is to have diligence run purely by attorneys alone, and the business folks getting input from the attorneys, and there likely or could be misunderstanding. So if you've already weaved in that IP story into the business story, you're likely to face less challenges, and again, it goes back to having a more convincing story and increasing the value of your company.
Certainly. And I know we've talked a lot about patents, but certainly IP would encompass trademarks, copyrights, variety of forms of intellectual property as part of that broader strategy. I do want to ask, we talked a lot earlier about some of the AI technologies, and I know time savings in particular. What would you say are the biggest changes in how you approach your job versus some of those tools, say 10 years ago, that weren't leveraging AI?
So there's more data available, so big data, lots of data, and the systems are more interconnected. So take, for example, pair data. Pair data is being utilized by a lot of service providers. A lot of tools are using it so that patent professionals or IP professionals can make better decisions. You have the ability to pull in more work in-house if that's what you would like to do. I think it makes it a lot easier. But at the same time, even if you don't want to pull in work in-house, it allows you to at least better track your matters and give you more insight into what's happening. So you're just not purely making a decision based on the communications with your outside attorneys, but you're also getting data and analytics and making broader and better decisions with your IP portfolio.
That's a very interesting point, and I'm thinking one of the areas at IP.com that we felt is crucial is being able to connect universities and corporations with each other for their licensing agreements. In fact, we've built out a module in Innovation Queue that lets customers flag their technologies as available for license, put them in touch with each other. If you take a look at an example, I'll take one from biotech, like in the genomics area, like reverse vaccinology technology took almost 20 years to bring to market in vaccines for meningitis B. And there was a lot of active research going on by corporations and some follow-on by universities for additional potential applications. And I was wondering maybe if you could speak about this in the medical device area and how startups that might be interested in bringing something to market can take advantage of university research, follow-on research in the most effective manner.
I think startups and even well-established companies can make use of university research, and it goes back to one of the earlier questions in our discussion today. It really is understanding the landscape, and when you have a good understanding of the landscape, you will likely identify some potentially relevant IP being held by universities. That's one way to find out what universities have. I mean, you can always visit their tech transfer pages, but what I've found is a lot of times the universities list only a subset of what's available. So if you can use tools to identify and then follow up with the universities, you'll be a lot further ahead. Now, in terms of the technologies that are held by universities, I think they can offer great value because you're just not licensing the patent by itself, but you could be obtaining access to researchers, to prototypes, to non-patent data that could really help you get a head start on your development. And so from a startup perspective, that could be quite useful, where you can hit the ground running, potentially leverage a lot of the researchers that are in the university early on, and move to transitioning to building your team slowly, but really have that expertise available. Now, that said, you probably want to be careful with universities. I mean, the university technologies are great. Sometimes they overpromise, but that's up to us to do that diligence and look at really what they have available. I mean, you can look for very specific spaces that are of interest. I think you'll find that with your searches, that as you're looking for a specific aspect, universities may pop up holding specific areas of patents. And then other times, universities are really ahead of the curve, and they have quite broad technologies that are available for license, and those could even be exploited to, again, help tell the story of the company, especially if it's a groundbreaking and really advanced technology that's ahead of everybody else.
So just to take that second prong in that question a little bit further, time to market, it's a challenge in biotech, it's a challenge in medical device. Certainly there are things in patents like regulatory extensions that can account for some of those time periods before the FDA and other government agencies. Do you think it presents a particular challenge in those fields to bring products to market effectively?
So it does. I mean, in the medical space, you do have different regulatory bodies that you need to deal with as compared to pure technical play. The barriers to entry, I would say, in addition to not only understanding your competitive landscape and understanding the potential barriers that may be there, nonetheless, dealing with the various regulatory bodies such as the FDA. I mean, it's a process that I think there's a lot of experts out there, and it's been done many times, and it can definitely be done. I mean, I think it's not a barrier that you can't get by. So it's something that you deal with it as you have an IP professional that's helping you navigate the patent landscape, IP landscape, likely going to have a regulatory expert that's going to help you get through the regulatory issues.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So to come to my last question, this is related to filing strategies, and I was wondering if you could share some of them, particularly any that might relate to what jurisdictions companies should decide to file in.
Yeah, so budget will definitely play a critical role here. I think, but what most will agree upon is that filing in the U.S. is probably a no-brainer. You definitely want to be filing in the U.S. Even with the fluctuations in law. It continues to remain a great place to file and build a patent portfolio. In terms of what else you could do. I mean, you could file PCT. We have done PCT filings initially. We've also done U.S. We've had great success with Track 1 followed by PCT. So there's multiple ways to go about filing internationally. And if PCT, as everyone knows, is a great way to buy some time. But in terms of actually filing in foreign jurisdictions, I think besides the U.S., Europe is a excellent venue, especially if I look at it from my perspective of being in a medical device company. You want to be in the U.S. There's a considerable market here. You want to be in Europe. And then you start looking at the developing countries, so the BRIC countries. And out of the BRIC countries where we've seen some success and where we've been focused on filing is China. And China, their system continues to get better, the patent system. Furthermore, one of the unique, it goes back to your question of the regulatory bodies. So in China, they also have, for medical devices, a Chinese FDA. And the Chinese FDA will grant an expedited pathway if you have your technology covered by IP. So there's an incentive to file patents in China to cover your technology. So in that respect, there's some overlap in China at least. We've also looked at, and we have filed in other BRIC countries, so we filed in India. The challenge with these countries is that their patent systems are not as evolved as the patent systems in U.S., Europe, or even China. So I think what it likely makes the most sense to do is to file some of your foundational patents in these growing jurisdictions, and then leave the bells and whistles patents to the areas that are more established, such as the U.S. and Europe.
That's a very interesting point. I do want to thank you, Jasminder, for joining us today in the dialogue. I do think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. And while we have the questions up, we'll put up some contact information for us at IP.com here. So my colleague Jen's been monitoring the questions, and one that comes up is just, has your experience with this semantic or AI-based search in helping find most relevant results made the tools that you're using more accessible beyond just the patent departments?
Yes. So it goes back to taking the disclosures that I mentioned. We have disclosures or patent drafting, and we're dumping in our results into the semantic search, machine learning-based search engines. The results are used by the R&D group, or can be, and you can even have the R&D professionals playing around with the tools to be able to identify references a lot faster. Again, it goes back between the R&D group and the patent group. It's really understanding what's going on in the field, and so, I mean, the more you know, the better.
That sounds great. There's another one that Allfield, someone asked about evaluating invention disclosures. And there's many ways that you can do that, assessing uniqueness of inventions, position in marketplace, and technologies that enable a variety of factors to be AI generated that relate to that. So that was the other question that we had. Jasminder, I would just once again like to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
Thanks.